Digital 410 Productions proudly presents the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast with your hosts Dodd Abernathy, Jeff Copsetta, and Henry Sledge.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, your favorite World War II-based podcast. And we are back for another fun-filled night after a long night at Kids Open House because, hey, school's back in season. But we'll save that for another episode for another time. Joining us, as always, is the one and only Henry Sledge. Henry, how you doing, sir? Sorry about that. I had you muted. How you doing, Henry?
I'm fine. I'm fine. I'll try to sound better the second time.
And speaking of second time, joining us for a follow-up episode, we're happy to have in his return, Mr. James Scott. James, how you doing today, sir?
Doing well, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me back on.
Thanks for coming back. So, you've been a world traveler since you last joined us. How'd that go?
Yeah, it was good. I joined pretty much every other person in the world visiting Italy, which was just absolutely packed, but it was a great trip.
At any point in time, did you feel like you're waiting in line at like Universal Studio?
You know, the only thing is certain places were absolutely packed, as you might imagine, but It was at least having a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old. I'm just so glad I'm not back in line again at Universal Studios, having done that over and over again. So, and
just think, that was probably before the acquisition and proliferation of all things Harry Potter at Universal Studios. It's insane down there now with that.
Oh, I'll tell you, I will say that the Harry Potter ride, that might be one of the best rides out there, though.
Yeah.
You know, it puts It's a Small World to shame from my childhood and the Peter Pan ride over at neighboring Disney World. So. Yeah,
it's come a long way since the old days of wooden roller coasters that would make you slip a disc even at the age of 14 and a half.
So true.
Yeah. So, Henry, I'm going to let you do as we always do. Why don't you pick it up and kick this episode off, sir?
Yeah, well, so when we had James on for James Scott Part 1, we talked about his second book, which was The War Below, which James, about a few days after we did our episode, I finished that book, enjoyed it very much, but we promised that to have you back the second time, we would let the rock star talk about his latest album. So Black Snow, man, let's talk about Black Snow. I mean,
please.
tell us, how you got to one. I mean, it's kind of cool because, you know, like Barrett Tillman, somebody whose work I really admire and really like. I got a bunch of his books on my shelf. I mean, he just did a book called 1945. Isn't that the title of it? And it's kind of that pushing into the last big push before it's all over in World War II. So I think it's cool that you've done Black Snow, which is about the super forts, hitting Japan. So I'm excited to talk about that.
Oh yeah, I think Barrett's book is like I think it's called like When the Shooting Stopped.
That's it. Yes. Yes. When the Shooting Stopped.
And I'm a big fan of his work as well. And it's interesting. We talked about last time I was on. We talked about The War Below and the genesis for this current project, which Black Snow looks at the March 1945 firebombing of Tokyo. Well, the genesis for this current project actually grew out of my submarine book.
Did it really?
Yeah, because you may recall, when you look at those guys like O'Kane and Pappy Boyington, all those guys I wrote about that are trapped there in this prison camp in Omori, which is a small island right there in Tokyo Bay. In March 1945, when America flies this devastating raid against the Japanese capital. And they had a front row seat to it all. And so when I was writing those scenes, through the perspective of those guys who were prisoners, who watched all this, I just marveled at this raid. And just, here you had these B-29 super fortresses. I mean, these just aeronautical monsters, just incinerating Tokyo. And I thought to myself, I need to come back at some point and revisit this story and just do that raid. And it took me 10 years, but I eventually made it back. And, sort of that winding path that life leads you down. But, but the genesis of it grew right out of my research of the submarine war.
Well, that's cool because now that you say that, it was because I've knocked out a couple books since The War Below. And I think because I knew about Black Snow, coming out, And as I finished up War Below, and I remember that scene where Pappy Boynton, he's outside watching the bombers come over, and he said something. And I'm not going to try to remember what it was that you said that Pappy said, but of course there were varied reactions. But yeah, that really struck me. I'm like, well, this is pretty cool because now we're going to have a book solely about. So it's about one raid in particular, James, or is it kind of a broad panoply of the whole Super Fort bombing campaign strategy?
Yeah, it covers all of it, but it really sort of zeroes in on that March 9th, 1945 raid. And it's sort of, the lead up to that. And then, that's when everything sort of slows down. And I try to look at that raid in great detail from not just the perspective of LeMay and the pilots and the airmen and the scouts, but also the Japanese civilians on the ground in Tokyo during that time, to really kind of give you sort of that full 360-degree view of what it was like, because that raid really was a huge turning point. Mm-hmm. That firebombing raid. I mean, we'd been flying missions with the B-29 Super Fortress against Japan, flying these high altitude daylight precision raids, trying to knock out their aircraft industry, and we really weren't having any luck. I mean, the Japanese weather was not cooperating. The jet streams high in the heavens over Japan were just wrecking accuracy, and so it was so bad, in fact, that LeMay's predecessor, General Haywood Hansel, was actually fired for his inability to sort of evolve and whatnot. And LeMay comes in and he has to sort of radically re-engineer this whole bombing strategy. And so he's the one who then, basically reworks it, brings the bombers in low, and does all that. So, I look at sort of that previous period under Hansel, and then I look at LeMay and sort of that. And then, of course, the last couple chapters actually deal with, the aftermath, because of course LeMay takes this raid and sort of runs with it, so to speak, and he just keeps punching and punching and punching. And within the next last several months of the war, he goes on to burn out 64 Japanese cities, and of course that paves the way for the atomic bombings in August.
How many Super Forts were on that raid?
About 325 took off, just under
from Saipan.
Yeah, they took off from Saipan, Guam, and Tinian. And
wow. Okay.
LeMay sent almost every bomber in his arsenal at that time. And of course, that many take off. Not all of them reach the target. It's a little under 300 that actually reach Tokyo. And of course, even with, and that's actually a small amount compared to even later in the war, when you had missions of, a few of them with up to 1,000 bombers. But those 300 are able to just exact, hellacious damage to the Japanese capital. I mean, 16 square miles just burned up in the span of 2 hours.
So by then he's got them going in to counteract the jet stream. He's got them going in at 5,000. Had that decision been made at that time?
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of people tend to sort of, they think that LeMay comes in January of 1945 and he takes over and he immediately changes the whole program, and he really doesn't. And that's kind of one of the sort of the oversimplifications of the stories, that LeMay comes in, and he takes over from Haywood Hansel. And Hansel, of course, has long been this proponent of high altitude daylight precision bombing. I mean, he's one of the architects who sort of came up with that strategy in the years leading up to the European War. He pushed it throughout the European War. He comes over to Japan, and of course, he's continuing it there, and it simply doesn't work. When LeMay is tapped to replace him after Hansel's fired, the two of them come face to face on the ground in Guam. And Hansel says to him, you have to remember, these guys know each other. I mean, Hansel used to be LeMay's boss in Europe. I mean, Hansel actually wrote a commendation for LeMay that's in his personnel file. Mm-hmm. And Hansel says to him, he says, look, remember, when all this is done, we're not going to be judged on whether we win the war, because at that point, it's pretty obvious we were, but we're going to be judged on how we win the war. And so by that, he's urging him to continue his plan of high altitude daylight precision bombing, because the idea being that it's, it's less catastrophic for civilians if you're just knocking out pinpoint industry than you are if you're just blanket firebombing everything. Mm-hmm. And LeMay says, look, I'm going to do what I need to do to win. But he takes Hansel and he initially continues his program. But LeMay, of course, with his engineering background and his sort of pragmatic, realistic approach to things, he starts tinkering with trying to figure out the variant in the equation that eluded Hansel. And over the course of several weeks, he's unable to do so. And that's when he makes this decision that, look, high altitude precision bombing is not going to work against Japan. If we're going to end this war, if we're going to do so quickly enough that we don't have to put boots on the ground and risk hundreds of thousands of lives and casualties by trying to retake Japanese cities, then we're going to have to sort of re-engineer this whole strategy. And that's when he comes up with, hey, we'll go from 25 and 30,000 feet down to 5,000 feet. We'll go from daytime to nighttime. We'll eliminate formations. We'll fly in one at a time, and we will switch out conventional ordnance for incendiaries, and we'll burn it all down.
I'm trying to remember the date because I haven't read Black Snow yet,
March
but it's
9th
on my
and
list
10th.
too.
Mm-hmm.
Do I, Don?
I believe it's March 9th.
Yes, it is.
So this was
sunset on March 9th, arrive in the skies over Tokyo a little after midnight.
all right. So this is after Iwo.
About the same time. It's all going on about the same time. So
Is Iwo Jima? Okay. Because I mean, well, it doesn't matter. So where I was going with that question was the horrific casualties of the island hopping campaign that had been going on through the Central Pacific, since go all the way back to Tarawa. Do you think LeMay, I mean, the stuff, I haven't read a lot of specific material about LeMay's bombing campaign with the B-29s, and that's why I'm looking forward to reading your book so much. But do you think he really got a sense of Americans were just like, how many of these little islands are we going to lose thousands and thousands of our boys on? We got to get this thing over. We've got them on the back foot. They're teetering. We just got to put a knockout punch in there and get it finished so we don't have to send guys like my father would have gone. 1st Marine Division was going right into Tokyo Bay.
Sure.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and that's the thing that people don't realize. I mean, just the extent of the carnage. I mean, how many of these blood-soaked islands we had all the way across the Pacific? I mean, like where your father fought, Tarawa as well. I mean, literally March 3rd, 1945, right before LeMay's bombers take off, we just wrap up the Battle of Manila, which is just a slugfest. That 29 days, 100,000 civilian casualties. I mean, the city totally destroyed, some of the worst atrocities of the war. And it's also a real window into what an urban fight against the Japanese is going to be like. Because, up until then, it's been islands, it's been jungles and whatnot. But Manila is the first glimpse that America gets at, like, okay, this is what it's going to be like inside Osaka, inside Tokyo, inside Nagoya. And in fact, I mean, one of MacArthur's top generals wrote in his personal diary, he said, I mean, is this what it's going to be like if we have to go back to Singapore and Hong Kong? So, I mean, that idea of what, that reinforced the need to end this war by bombing. And of course, it's important to remember too, at this point in the war, I mean, Americans are pretty fatigued.
Yeah.
The war against Germany has taken a lot longer than people thought. The whole promise of precision bombing, collapsing the German economy like a house of cards did not pan out. Instead, it takes the British, firebombing, it takes the Americans sort of pinpoint bombing, and still, just goes on and on. I mean, the German economy is far more resourceful than people realized. And, here we are just now beginning the air war against the Japanese homeland. And of course, people are thinking, is this going to be a years long effort like it was against Germany? And American patience was tired at that point. I mean, the war was a massive undertaking. I mean, we got to remember, FDR in 1944 in his State of the Union speech is calling for a budget that would dedicate 96 cents of every federal dollar spent just to the war and its debt service.
And that's not counting war bonds and all that.
Oh yes, I mean, it's a financial burden. It is a emotional burden. I mean, Americans they're tired of this. They're tired of sending their husbands and sons and brothers off to fight. So this thing needs to end. So there's tremendous pressure on people like LeMay and on Hap Arnold to hurry up and find a way to end this thing. And of course, that's where the B-29 comes in. Hey, you've got this hemispheric bomber, that can just deliver ultimate ruin.
And not to mention the fact that we have history from going back to 1942 from Guadalcanal. For the first few island campaigns, they saw how fanatical and how willing Japan was to expend life on property that wasn't theirs for more than 3 years. What's going to happen when it comes down to their official homeland? It's just going to be all out, drag out, carnage. And so the body count would have been tremendous.
Totally. And the Japanese still had millions of troops in the home islands. They were handing spears out to grandmothers and school kids. I mean, they were preparing for a massive defense of the homeland. And so that's, and if you look at, I mean, You look at Manila, you look at the Mariana Islands, you look at Iwo. I mean, God, what a nightmare that was. I mean, just the amount of carnage there, and you see why the air leaders felt this tremendous pressure to do what they could to bring an end to it.
Well, you were just pointing out that the B-29 changed things, and for those who don't know a whole lot about aviation, such as myself, let's keep in mind that the B-29 was at that point the largest aircraft, but also had pressurized cabin. That was nice. Dual-wheeled tricycle landing gears, an analog computer-controlled fire system. So what was the previous one they used? I want to say Hudson.
The B-24s would have been.
No, the old targeting system on the old school ones.
Oh, the Norton?
Yeah, the Norton gauge.
Yeah.
And
the,
so...
Yeah, I mean, the B-29 was like, I mean, it was the Rolls Royce. At least it was pitched that way as the Rolls Royce of the skies for aviation. I mean, it was, far bigger than the Flying Fortress, which gave it its name, the Super Fortress. I mean, it was maybe 55,000 parts, 12 miles of wiring. I mean, it had a tail that rose up the height of a 3-story building and a wingspan larger than the Wright brothers' first flight. I mean, it was just and it was designed to bridge these vast distances. I mean, it could fly 4,000 miles. And that's important for people to remember. I mean, you compare the bombing raids over Europe. I mean, okay, you could take off from an airfield in England, hit Berlin, and come back in about 1,500 miles. 1,500 miles gets you just one way from the Mariana Islands to Tokyo. Okay. And same every Europe, if something goes wrong, if you get a bunch of flak damage or fighter damage and engine trouble, whatever, and you have to bail out, you're coming down, hopefully might be picked up by friendly, locals in an occupied country. But worst case scenario, you're coming down on land, in the Pacific until we get Iwo, you're coming down in a vast, dark, unforgiving ocean. And so, I mean, it's just it's a whole different beast when you get out to the Pacific. And of course, the B-29, for all the hype, I mean, all the money, I mean, it's the single most expensive weapon system of the war, and people forget that, the B-17.
$3 billion.
Oh, yeah, 3.7. I mean, the B-17 had several years before the war to work the kinks out. B-29, the first ones roll right out of the factory and go straight into combat. And just tremendous conditions, and of course that's when you realize all the problems with the plane.
What you guys just touched on, the expense of it, because I have read that it was the most expensive weapon system ever developed.
It'd be $54 billion today.
Yeah,
and let me just pause real quick.
40 engines, or
well, I mean, it was everything about it.
Everything.
Well, you got your pressurized systems.
I mean, when you pressurized, okay, so I mean, just to give you an example, like when they pressurized those cabins, they had to figure out a new gun control system to be able to work, because no longer could you just sort of hang out of a plane and shoot. I mean, everything had to be. I mean, they had to have a computerized tracking system for the gun,
right?
And so it just, I mean, everything about it was revolutionary at that time, and of course, it was put into production before they ever even knew if it could fly. So of course, we end up ordering about 4,000 of them. And in order to churn out that many of them, a lot of them were built at several factories around the country, but the dominant factory, one of them was in Kansas. The federal government built a brand new city in Kansas called Plainview. Wow. I mean, it had elementary schools, it had movie theaters and everything, just to house this army of workers needed to put together this aeronautical monster. So it really, the atomic bomb only cost $2 billion.
That's what I was going to say. The entire design and development of that plane was $3 billion, whereas Manhattan was $1.9 billion. And
it was a deal compared to the bomber.
And I have to roll back because I know when you compared it to the Rolls Royce, we had listeners like cringe. So let's just say it was the Duesenberg of the day.
Yeah.
It was a doozy.
So I'm just thinking like pricey, expensive vehicle, not talking about Rolls Royce engines and things like that. Using it as a generic, I should say.
Right.
Ferrari, it was a doozy. Yeah. Now, when it came to the plan and preparation for this raid, obviously they had no control or no prediction of the high winds that would help the final result of the firebombing. But did they actually take in consideration the amount of tinder and building materials that these Japanese cities were made up of when planning this air raid?
Yeah, and it's a great question. It's a good point to touch on too, and an opportunity to kind of digress a bit because LeMay gets all this credit as the one who sort of shifts gears and starts to firebomb Japan. But of course, that didn't happen in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, it's not like LeMay just decided to do this and it was all there. I mean, there was great inertia moving in that direction, really, since even the outbreak of the war. I mean, the very beginning of the war, I mean, America realized that we did not have a very good flame weapon, a good incendiary. So, I mean, that led, to the development of the incendiary bombs that LeMay would ultimately use, which led to the creation of napalm, which was first tested on the campus at Harvard. Meanwhile, as, engineers are developing that, war planners are analyzing what makes Japanese cities so vulnerable to fire. And of course, it was easier for folks then than it is for us today to recall. But literally less than 2 decades before the firebombing, of course, a massive earthquake hit Japan at Tokyo and Yokohama and led to a huge fire in 1923 that burned up most of the capital.
Oh wow!
And of course, that revealed sort of the great Achilles heel of Tokyo. It's just how flammable of a city it was because, the Japanese, you think of Tokyo today, it's the steel and glass high rises, it's Tokyo Vice, et cetera, lost in translation. But the reality is back then it was a sea of 1- and 2-story wooden buildings, sliding screen doors, things like that. I mean, totally flammable. And of course, crazy density. I mean, certain areas of Tokyo, 135,000 people per square mile.
That's insane.
So before LeMay ever even comes on, American war planners are sort of piecing through all this information. And they go so far, in fact, is to track down the insurance adjusters for foreign businesses who had worked the 1923 earthquake and fire to get a window into just the flammability of it all. So they put together these incredible target folders on all of Japan's major cities that sort of identified critical incendiary zones, basically burn zones, like what areas are the most flammable, what type of ordnance would help to sort of start these fires and get it going and whatnot. So LeMay has this entire, and then once they get all that together, they then build a mock Japanese village in the deserts of Utah, Dugway Proving Ground, and proceed to burn it all down over and over and over again throughout the summer of 1943 to test these theories and these ideas and these new weapons. And so by the time LeMay takes over, he's got a great new incendiary. He's got an entire Bible broken down of all Japanese cities and their flammability and where to target. And of course, now he's got the B-29 and everything else. So it was really kind of served up for him. All he had to do was really take it and put it in action. And so again, while LeMay certainly deserves all the credit for initiating it, a lot of the hard work and all that had actually been previously done to prepare him for this transition into firebombing.
I was not aware we had done our homework to that granular of a degree. I mean, actually tracking down insurance adjusters from the earthquake 2 decades before. I mean,
it's such
that is scientific.
Yeah, it's such fascinating reading when you go through and you look at it because I mean, and also I mean when you look at like when they built this mock Japanese city, they also built a German one incidentally too to test these weapons. I mean the efforts they went to achieve authenticity. I mean they went so far as to go to Hawaii and remove tatami mats from Japanese temples in Hawaii. And in order to make sure they had enough, they actually built their own tatami factory in order to make enough of this iconic floor covering because they really wanted to know, hey, when we're going to set this thing on fire, I mean, we want it to be as realistic of conditions as possible. So I mean, they did their homework. Absolutely.
Was there a sense, James, in your research, and because you may have touched on this at the end of War Below, talking about the POWs and all when they saw those guys flying over, was there a sense of, because the tragedy of we knew, like our Navy fighters and torpedo bombers and submarines, sinking Japanese shipping, sometimes the tragedy was it was a POW ship. And there were some very sad instances where, the Navy pilots didn't know. They were just targeting Japanese shipping, Did they have it in the back of their mind that, hey, we need to try to be on the lookout for where American POWs will possibly be housed? I mean, or was there was probably no way for them to even know because the Japanese certainly weren't going to demarcate that.
No, exactly. I mean, we knew there were some camps in the area. In fact, if you look at the briefing notes for that mission, they actually talk about the fact that there are some POW camps, but those camps are believed to be outside of the target area. And we do have some terrific accounts from diaries and POWs who witnessed it that I've used in the war below and had looked at again for this, who did see it. But as far, I didn't see any cases in any of the research I did of any American prisoners being killed in this raid. That said, a dozen of them died in Hiroshima during the atomic attack. So, I mean, there were certainly cases of American prisoners of war being affected by these raids, but nothing I saw indicated any of that for the March 9th raid.
Okay. Was there anything in your research, like from Japanese diaries and observations of it, seeing these B-29, was that the first time they would have seen B-29s?
No, we've been flying them. We've been flying missions since November, and those missions were they were all daylight raids. They were all at high altitudes, and so and they were all really aiming at this largely just a handful of factories in Nagoya and Tokyo that they couldn't seem to knock out because of weather and jet streams and things like that. So the residents had actually grown pretty conditioned to seeing the American bombers. In fact, I mean, they joked about it, and that some of them would say, I wonder what those pilots are eating for their lunch up there. But there was a certain sense of security too, because they knew that the bombers, after a while, they sort of developed the routine that hey, they're just going after those factories. They're in the suburbs outside of the city. We're safe and all of that, and so it sort of lulled a lot of them into this false sense of security. Mm-hmm. All that goes out the window when LeMay changes everything, and that's also one of the things that LeMay counted on. You got to remember, I mean, LeMay when he's planning this mission, some of his staff officers said, "Look, man, we don't know what the Japanese artillery is going to be like, and you need to be prepared. You could lose as much as 70% of your forces on this." And which would just be staggering. I mean, that's literally 2,000 lives, 200 bombers, and but he's pretty convinced that he's right, and that this is not a gamble, but this is a calculated risk. But he, but that's kind of hanging over him. But particularly since he's sort of reorienting everything from day to night, from high altitude to low altitude, he really he knows the Japanese aren't going to expect it. It's such a drastic change. This is going to be kind of like an aerial sucker punch. It's going to catch him totally off guard. And that's why he immediately says, look, if this is successful, we're going to go and hit 4 others right after. We're going to boom, 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 boom. And that's essentially what he does. In the span of 10 days, he flies, 5 of these missions and burns up 32 square miles of, several of Japan's key cities.
Mm. I'm familiar with this particular raid, but it never occurred to me that LeMay organized and executed this raid within 5 months, 5 short months. And I'm not laughing because it's funny, but the amount of planning that went into this mission, and I'm assuming the amount of planning that went into the dropping of the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, the fact that they were 5 months apart, it never occurred to me until this conversation. So as you're talking about, I'm like doing my math, like, really? That got all that done? And that amount of time is kind of tremendous. Because that the Hiroshima bombing took a hell of a lot longer than 5 months to plan. So the fact that he's probably double stacking this planning and getting it all done is just a tremendous amount of work.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the thing about the air war against Japan. I mean it's so transformative but it's also so compressed. I mean, if you look at the air war against Germany, it just drags on for years. As the British initially started off with precision bombing, then eventually moved over to firebombing. The Americans come in and join the fight. They do their precision bombing. The two sort of link up for the around-the-clock fighting and all that. Then you get over to the Pacific, and it's like, boom, it's just this massively compressed period of time in which huge transformation in how we attack Japan and the results and everything else. I mean, it's really fly the first mission against Tokyo, late November 1944, and then the atomic attacks are in August of 45. I mean, it's just the span of just, less than a year to that massive transformation. And you're right. I mean, it's interesting. So LeMay, after he firebombs Tokyo, and he gets no pushback because, there was a lot of concern, like, what is the American public going to say with this? Because up until now we've been precision bombing and all this, and here we are suddenly just burning down cities. And of course, there was no real pushback from the American public at that point. And so LeMay kind of interprets that as a green light and just begins this whole city busting campaign, in which he goes on over the course of several months to burn 64 cities. After the big cities, Tokyo, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, he moves on to secondary and even then tertiary size cities. I mean, so he's literally burning down cities with 40,000 people in them. By the time that comes around to the atomic attacks, the only reason that Hiroshima still exists as a viable target is because LeMay had previously been ordered to not attack it. He had to leave some bigger cities off of his target list so that the United States would have an intact municipality on which to test this new weapon. Because, at that point, LeMay's burning down cities of like 30,000. Hiroshima would have long since been destroyed.
Yeah.
Right.
Otherwise, so it's really, and that's, LeMay was one of the ones who he didn't think the atomic bomb was necessary. He was a good soldier. He was going to go along with what his orders were, but, he was very clear that, look, hey, we'd burned through most of their cities. It was kind of gratuitous. And part of that's probably professional jealousy. He'd worked really hard to pioneer this whole thing, and he knew that the atomic bomb, the new technology, was going to sort of steal the spotlight. And of course it did. But I'm sure there's a little bit of that sort of like, jealousy there. So, but
there's always an officer's ego involved. At that point, James, was there really even any Japanese fighter opposition left at that point?
No, it's interesting. In fact, you see some of these guys because, it gets into the transformation there because, early on, by the time LeMay takes over, morale is really plummeting there in the 21st Bomber Command. The guys are flying these crazy long missions, they're over hostile waters. They're dealing with Japanese fighter attacks, artillery. Until Iwo Jima falls, Japan's executing raids from Iwo Jima against Saipan, and so it's just morale's kind of in this free fall. And then very quickly, once the city raids began and sort of America begins to pick up this momentum. By July, these planes are flying over small Japanese cities, and they're encountering no fighters, no flak, nothing. And you see in some of their letters and some of their oral histories, the guys starting to say, hey, this no longer feels like a fair fight. Here we are, we're just coming in and we're just dumping ordnance and we're burning cities down. And so you really, within the span of just a few months, you go from airmen feeling this total terror and sort of, moral challenges to suddenly, hey, here I am eating a sandwich while we're burning down an entire city. So that's what I'm saying. Everything about this thing is it's so compressed. It just, they move from, one thing to the next so quickly.
Well, you touched on it in our first episode with you. It's not like the Japanese really did some serious self-evaluation and then adjusting of how they handled things, from say 42 to 44 and then on into 45. Which I think the U.S. Navy, U.S. Army Air Corps, we were all doing that, trying to perfect our processes and dial everything in.
And that's what's staggering is, they could see what was happening to Germany. This was no surprise that, that this was going to come. In fact, one of Emperor Hirohito's top advisors after the fall of the Mariana Islands, which for the first time puts Tokyo within reach of American bombers, he says to the emperor, he says, look, hell is upon us.
Yes.
And they knew it was coming, but yet they were so ill prepared. They didn't, there was no real effort to dig bunkers and air raid shelters. A lot of it was left up to civilians to prepare on their own. And, of course, they dug what amounted to basically a tiny foxhole in their yard. And, of course, you get a huge firestorm, as one of the Japanese people said, everybody was roasted like potatoes. Their few concrete buildings they had, like schools and train stations, initially provided some shelter, but eventually the glass and the windows melted and the sparks got in and people were incinerated inside of those. Japan didn't bother to cut any fire breaks through its dense cities. It didn't bother to up its firefighting services. They still depended on neighborhood groups to help put out fires, with
bucket brigades,
with brooms and bags of sand, so that could fend off a napalm incendiary. It was just, it's like so much. There was so much that could have been done that simply wasn't. And it was just this, like, they had their head in the sand. Here's, Hamburg's burned in July of 43. Hello.
All right.
It should have been a huge warning, so it's really almost 2 years later, almost, before Tokyo gets burned. There was plenty of time to have actually taken steps to evacuate your cities, move people out. And they did some of that. They did move children between the ages of 3rd and 6th grade out of the cities. But, beyond that, I mean, they should have done a lot more. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
His name is James M. Scott. His new book, Black Snow, Curtis LeMay, The Firebombing of Tokyo and the Roads to the Atomic Bomb, is currently available for pre-order. The book comes out on September 6th. So head on over to Amazon or anywhere fine books are sold and go ahead and pre-order James's book. James, thank you so much for coming on and following up and bringing us some much-needed information about the firebombing and Curtis LeMay. And hope to have you on here again soon. We're going to go ahead and let James hit the road and get things done. And Henry and I will continue on and bring you some more quality entertainment. So, James, thank you so much. And before you go, you want to get your plugs out there?
Yeah, thanks, guys, so much for having me on. Like you said, it's book's available for pre-order. Check it out, Amazon. You can also go to jamesmscott.com. Again, jamesmscott.com. So, Don, Henry, thanks so much, guys. Always a real treat to be on with you and your listeners.
Hey, thanks a lot.
And as always, every episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, you can find the accommodating or the coinciding episode over at WTSPWorldWar2.com. That's where you can find all the pertinent links, photos, cute things, and what have yous. And while you're there, go ahead and click on that Patreon link and subscribe. It'll only cost you $1 a month. That goes a long way to help support what we do here at the Digital 410. We don't have a lot overhead, but we do have some. And so for every little dollar you guys help donate, that goes a long way. And Henry fella, how you been, sir?
Well, doing okay, man. Just trying to keep the fires burning, so to speak. I'm glad we were able to have a good show tonight. I know, last week, of course, stuff going on, we were not able to have a show. So,
well, I think we'd be a little remiss, especially that this podcast oftentimes finds itself up to its elbows in the swampy waters of the South Pacific. That the air date today is August 8th. We all know what yesterday was, so maybe we should get a little bit into some Guadalcanal talk a little bit before we wrap up the show. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I was actually about to say, is that Lunga Point, the guys going across Lunga Point? That is one of my favorite pictures from World War II.
I look back as if I have his picture, but I'm just looking at a green wall. I don't know. It's all green. So,
okay.
No, I'm laughing because for those listening at home, I have a green screen behind me, and I have a photo of Guadalcanal. So Henry asked me about the photos to actually turn around in real life, and I'm looking at the green curtain behind me like, oh, stupid, it's not there. But yeah, I believe it is. That is a fantastic photo. That's second only to my favorite, which is the famous photo of your family friend, one Sid Phillips, urinating on a palm tree.
Yeah.
As they got off of
Guadalcanal. I've got the first Marine Division history, The Old Breed. That's the name of that book by George McMillan. And I've told you and Jeff this story. My dad, every veteran got one, right? Mm-hmm. If you were 2nd Division, 3rd, or whatever, every Marine got his unit, his division history book. And so Sid got a copy, Dad got a copy. Dad took Sid's, wrote his notes in Sid's. Sid's took my dad's, wrote his notes in my dad's. And by that picture you're talking about, he wrote, hey, everybody was yelling, hey, Phillips, you're going to go down in history taking a leak. Now,
for the uninitiated or the people who kind of sneer at thoughts of things like this, as far, well, how do you know? There's 100 cameramen out there, 1,000 guys. I'm sure there's more than one guy urinating on a tree. And I believe it was in Sid's book, or maybe even in the war, where he actually said, well, the reason I know it's me is because the guys were confused. Here it was 11 a.m. in the South Pacific, and the photographer's using a flash. And somebody said, hey, Mac, what's with the flash? Because when you're standing out in the jungle and a flash goes off middle of the day, it's going to get your attention. And he said it helps to minimize the shadow. So even though and so they knew that he just took a picture because they're all sitting around and a flash goes off in the middle of the jungle. And that's how they knew to tell Sid, oh, hey, he just got a picture of you up there urinating because of the flash bulb that he used in the middle of the Guadalcanal jungle at probably 9. Yeah. Well, no, the land. Yeah. Probably 10:30, 10:45 in the morning time.
I'm trying to look, Don, and find the actual. I've got the book right here. Can you see that? Okay?
Oh yeah, that's a beaut. Hold that back up real quick. I don't know if you ever noticed that. Hold that back up to the light.
Okay.
When you held it at a certain angle, it almost looked like the material on the book was in the herringbone twill pattern, like the uniform shirts.
It is.
Is it? So that's because it looks dark until you angle it. So that's very cool that they use the HBT material for the cover on that. But
I want to find that actual. Here it is, page 90.
Wow, that's a quick find. Good on you.
So, yeah, I'm going to read the actual text. It says, relief moving up. Men of the 7th Marines take a break before going forward to relieve another Marine unit. Sid, I'm going to show you this. Sid, as best I can if you can see it.
Sure.
Sid wrote in his own handwriting, no, H21, 30 minutes after landing on Guadalcanal, August 7th, 42. And then up here on the next page, he says, I was told somebody had just taken our picture and, quote, Phillips, you're going to go down in history taking a leak. So let me, that's where the part about taking the leak is written. And then the other stuff, I know it's hard to see on my.
No, it's great. It's so funny. You have a couple of guys down front. They're mopping their brow. Their helmets are off, and it's almost like a perfect crescent moon. They're sitting up like 50 yards out in the opening, pissing on a tree.
Yeah, I mean he's labeled a bunch of these guys too. It's kind of hard to see it, but yeah, man, that's a great picture. I mean, this thing's a treasure. It's got notes from my dad.
It may be worth it to try to one day sit down and decipher the names of the people he has listed in that photo, and maybe we could publish an unofficial. Here's according to so and so, because there may be some people out there who don't realize that their great grandfather's in there, their grandfather's in there, and
well, the way he did it, like he's got the guy sitting on a log facing him, he labels him as Skip.
Oh, okay, I got you.
And he's got a guy named labeled Lucas, and then just to the left of Sid is Doc. And then it's really hard. Beyond that, man, it's pretty tough to see.
No worries.
But yeah, I mean, this thing's a treasure. It's got my dad's notes. It's got Sid's notes. I mean, I love that book.
We've often talked that during this time in the war, part of the reason that one of the key reasons that the Marines were sent down there is thanks to World War I. At that point, the Army was in quote unquote no fighting shape. The Marines were the closest thing we had, at least allegedly, to a battle ready group, even though we're out there with 1901 Springfields and web gear, and even early stage. I mean, right up until before they shipped off, they were still using the old Kelly helmets at boot camp. It wasn't wasn't until they shipped off that they got the. Could you imagine talking to Sid and saying, "Hey, 19-year-old Sid Phillips, you see that cardboard liner in your helmet? This annoying hot thing that caused a rash on my forehead." Yeah, that thing in a worse condition, 85 years from now, will be worth about $3,000. Meanwhile, they're probably just kicking them down the beach and everything else, but they're out there with their holly liners and their, early gear, just fighting everything they have with outdated equipment until the end of Guadalcanal when the Army came, and along came the M1 Garens. But as we know, a lot of the old breed, they did not want to give up their 1903s because they got so proficient with them. And I mean, and even to this day, when you see sharpshooters, they're using bolt action rifles, and there's a reason for that. You just have a better long range accuracy. But, when you're trying to move troops quickly, as we've talked about in the past about, Chesty Puller and rightfully or wrongfully how quickly he was trying to get men across areas to achieve their objectives, it's a lot easier to do when you can lay down 8 rounds in half a second or, a second and a half.
As you're talking, Don, I mean, it just occurred to me, if you want me to, man, I can read a few of these notes that Sid wrote.
Oh, I think our audience would be tickled. I was going to say pink, but then I wanted to go with the sage green of Herringbone's will.
Oh, yeah. Well, there is no greater color. So he wrote here, breakfast, 2 hard-boiled eggs and shells and 1 small apple passed out by Navy and wood apple crate on deck, galley closed.
Come a long way from the distant futures of people getting steak and eggs before they make amphibious landings.
Yeah. He says, we'll never forget cruisers all right behind us, firing and rolling from recoils, salvo after salvo, engine stopped. I remember talking to him about that because when the Ken Burns thing, the war came out in 2007, my family and I went down to Mobile. Of course, my dad had been passed away since '01, but we knew the whole story. Ken Burns came into town. He chose Mobile because of the sledge connection, and then he met my brother, and my brother said, well, my dad's best friend is Sid Phillips, who lives down the road in Theodore, so that's how Sid Phillips came to be in the war.
Sure.
But when the war premiered, they had a premiere obviously in every city that they profiled, but there was one in Mobile, and so we went down there for it. Hung out with Ken Burns for a couple of days, Sid and I spent some time talking, and it was really cool because I hadn't seen Sid in a long time, and so I had become passionate about my dad's history and all of this. And of course, been to Peleliu in 1999. And so I had learned, I'd read this book. I've read this book three times, I think. I need to read it again because it'll help me with my book. But Sid it was really cool to sit there and talk to him about some of this stuff. And I remember the thing about the cruisers lined up behind them. Every time they'd fire, the whole vessel would kind of roll from the recoil. And it was kind of misty and foggy. And of course, it was all the cordite fumes and everything hanging in the humid air.
Here's a question I have. I don't know if I've seen it documented anywhere. I mean, I know pilots suffered from hearing loss because of the lack of insulation in the planes and all that, just loud ass engines. Mm-hmm. Did your father or Sid or any of their friends suggest or speculate that did any of them suffer from early hearing loss and as they got older, that they may have contributed to the mortars?
That is a really good question, and I will answer it by saying, as I went through my dad's unpublished material, and this is the second book of the manuscript right here, and you can see yellow stuff. That's all unpublished stuff. But that's pretty early. That's still during the Peleliu campaign. But when I was going through the Okinawa part, highlighting what didn't get published, and with the old breed, he talked a lot about undergoing, and some of this stuff I can't believe they didn't publish it, Don, because he just talked about, on Okinawa, Peleliu was bad, but Okinawa was just, they went through some Japanese mortar and artillery barrages that, he said literally left him, all of them, not just him, just dazed.
Yeah.
Utterly dazed. And he did not have bad hearing. My dad, his hearing was really good until the last couple of years of his life.
Because not only are they firing off mortars, but in those situations, they got all those rifles, machine guns, just everything, just pop, 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 pop. And, things were a lot louder back then. And plus you're just shooting mortars off. It's just, you would think after a while, but that's great to hear that they didn't seem to acknowledge any long-term effect. Here's a question I doubt you can answer for me, and hopefully somebody in our ever-growing vast audience worldwide, by the way. Shout out to everybody not in the United States who listens, and shout out to people in the United States who listen, but it's always fun to see the countries outside. Absolutely. Have you ever, in all of your research, my aforementioned love of the M1 helmet, you got guys, especially in the PTO, they're sitting under trees, a lot of times out in the open, on the edge of banks, and downpours and monsoons. Have you ever seen a report or heard any witness of anyone being struck by lightning while sitting out in the rain with a steel pot on their head?
I have not.
I didn't know if maybe the fiberglass liner provided insulation, but you would think after hundreds and thousands of guys sitting outside, whether it's in the Pacific or the European theater or Africa, I have not heard a single report or seen a picture of a helmet that was struck by lightning.
You would think the odds of that with all those guys, hundreds of thousands of young men with those things, the odds of that happening are pretty good. I didn't come across anything going through my dad's manuscript on that.
I can't remember. I think it may have been in Helmet for My Pillow, which, by the way, I was going to save until what you're reading. I've started reading this again.
Good. I love that book.
Was it in this or your father's book? I think it was in Helmet for My Pillow that their buddy got crushed by a tree stump from a mortar strike or a rock. I think it may be in Helmet for My Pillow.
I think it's Helmet for My Pillow. And you know what? You have inspired me because I'm about to finish. Damn it. I meant to bring it down here to answer the what you're reading part. I left it upstairs. I'm about to finish a little book on the air campaign, Marine fighter pilot. And since this is the anniversary of the start of Guadalcanal, or, yesterday, I think I may reread Helmet for My Pillow.
Well, the reason I've been reading the Last Voyage, and to be honest with you, I I found it interesting, and I'm going to finish it, but it got to the modern day where they're actually looking for the ship. And then real quick before I get into why I started reading Helmet from My Pillow again, you want to talk about a family that was destined for fame. The captain, and I don't want to try to pronounce his name without the book in front of me because I'll slaughter it. The captain, obviously, ship went down, made history. But his one son grew up, became an engineer, was one of the two people who invented the Polaroid camera as we know it. And then his other son went on to design and greatly distribute medical equipment, primarily stents and cardiac equipment, which is how the two of them made so much money that they could finance that search. So not only, their dad make history with being in that vessel, but one of them went on to be the co-partner in the creation of Polaroid cameras, and the other one basically helped with research and financing and all that for stents and cardiac stuff. But I'll get into that a little more later on another episode. The reason I got to read Helmet for My Pillow, I've read this book twice. I think I read With the Old Breed probably 6 times. I was on Facebook, and as Facebook does, there's always those people in groups who want to prove that they know more than everybody else, or they just like to badmouth certain things. And a guy had a legitimate question. He showed the picture of the uniform. I think he maybe got it from a prop website, or maybe it was up for sale somewhere, but it was a picture of the P-41s that they wore, that Lecky wore in the Pacific when they came out of the brig. And the uniform had a big black dot on the left chest and then on the right thigh. And someone posted on Facebook, has anybody ever seen these photos? I've never seen a photo or anybody talk about black dots. And then someone's like, well, these movies aren't always historic and blah, blah, blah. And I quickly went on there and said, well, actually, Lecky mentions it in his book, A Helmet for My Pillow. He's talking about that's where the guards would shoot you if you tried to escape. And someone said, I would like to see that. And I said, I'll find it. And I quickly found it. But the original poster thanked me, and he went and found the PDF. But anyhow, so after reading through 3 pages, skipping around trying to find that, I was reminded of how eloquent of a writer Robert Lecky was, because he had that writing background. He was a writer in the sports book. And his adjectives, his descriptions, his way of just explaining the most minute thing, like at the very beginning. And I, before the show, I'm like trying to Google, like I'm trying to find like old school, which they don't exist. Maybe somebody in Sid's family might have one. I would love to like see a candid shot, because he's explaining how the dirt road out in front of then the camp called New River, how it was basically all dirt road, but it was all lined with these old, just little crappy bar shacks before they got out to the main city. And then you would go down to New Berm or to the other big area to go to the, and I would just love to see a photo of these old, just somebody standing in the street or taking a picture of somebody in front of some of these old rickety bar shacks, but they're explaining how they stole a 12-pack of beer. And it's just, he's such an elegant writer, and I love this book so much that I'm like, you know what, I'm going to pause on the other book that I've been kind of dragging my feet on, and I'm just going to reread this thing again, and why not? It's that time of year. And so if you guys haven't read, I'm sure most of you have, but if you're new to the hobby, or you just dipped your feet into this World War II thing, maybe you're ETO type guy and you're new to this podcast, I think Henry, Jeff, and I would strongly suggest Helmet for My Pillow needs to be added to your at-home library.
It's a classic, and like I said, man, I'm within a few pages of finishing Airborne Aerial Escapades by J. Hunter Reinberg. It became the CO of EMF 122, which was a Marine Corsair squadron that was based on Peleliu for a while, and earlier down in the Solomons flying F4Fs. But when I'll finish that tonight probably, and I think I'm going to join you, since it is the anniversary of those guys, splashing ashore at Guadalcanal, and reread Helmet for My Pillow, because I've been wanting to do that anyway. And with me working on my project, it would benefit me. So, that's a classic, man. I remember reading, I had something happen to it, Don, but I had the first edition copy that my father had, where he wrote his name in it, because he had bought it back in the 50s. And he read it and wrote notes in it, because in his mind, as we know now, in the back of his mind, he was like, I got to start, working on my own book. So we're talking, late 60s, probably maybe early 60s when he read it. But I remember I probably read that book when I was 12 years old. Man, that's one of the first war books I ever read.
And back to the uniform thing a little. So you're gonna take the memory off of one person. Well, if you guys paid attention to the HBO miniseries The Pacific, one Robert Leckie was a private when he got home. Now you may ask yourself, how is a guy who joins the Marine Corps in 1942, fights in Guadalcanal, all the way up to Peleliu, and still a private when he gets home? Well, because the miniseries only covered one of his multiple stints in the brig. He is probably in there between 4 or 5, 6 times. Because I think probably 4.
Was it that many? Really?
It was 3 or 4, because he mentions at the end, that's part of the reason why he left the Marine Corps as a private, because he was in the brig so much. He was in the brig so much, he became mayor one time. You're like, mayor? Yes, he actually goes through and it's been so long since you've read it, you probably forgot. He actually goes through the hierarchy of the brig mayor. And people don't realize, and I wish they would have showed this in the series, when you went to the brig, they literally put you in a concrete room with a water spigot on the side.
Yeah.
And it was dark. No blankets, no towels, just you and your aforementioned brown dotted P41s. And once a day, the prison guard would open up the door and just kick in a tray of bread and empty cans for the water. And basically, it was like... Remember when we used to play dodgeball in school and you had to run to the line and grab the ball and everybody's like trying to get to the ball? That's what it was like. It was like, there was no distribution of food amongst prisoners. It was slid on the floor and every man for himself. And he had been in the, because prior to the story we saw in the Pacific where he got in a fight with, I think it was probably Spearmint or Smoothface. I think it was Spearmint because he was a fan of Smoothface. When he pulled the gun on him when he was drunk, that was actually his second time. The first time he went to the brig is when they got caught going AWOL and sneaking up the. Actually, no, he got court-martialed, but they were on their way to Guadalcanal, so he spent a day or two in the George S. Eliot's onboard jail because they
actually. All right, since you just mentioned the George F. Eliot, here you go. Here's a little thing from the old breed where Sid wrote a note here. All right, let's see. The second Jap air raid of the Guadalcanal campaign came at 12:30, and this time the bombers not only stopped the unloading, but actually found and hit a target. The USS George F. Eliot was set afire, and with it, much of the supply of the 2nd Battalion, 1st Marines. Now, I'm doing a rewatch right now. I just watched parts 2, 3, and 4 Saturday night, so I'm ready to jump into part 5 here. Probably this coming weekend. Didn't in part 2 or maybe in part 1, Don, you had the guys go, they got the George F. Eliot, and that one of that officer, he goes, well, they got all our ass wiped, or
yes,
our ammunition, all our ass wiped.
What happened was, and there's actually, it may have been in Guadalcanal Diaries or one of the other ones. The practice at that point is when they did the initial landings, one person from each platoon, probably the least effective fighting man, was volunteered to stay behind with everybody's gear that wasn't taken on the landing. So if you're doing a light landing where you're wearing your upper pack, the bottom part of your pack, your blankets, your tents would be left with your sea bag, with one person from each platoon. And then after the beachhead was established and they unload the boat, they would bring all your crap and it would be secured, back in the back lines, and you can go and get your personal effects and whatever. Well, when the George S. Eliot sank, yes, all of the guys' personal effects, anything that Sid and Leckie and the boys weren't allowed to bring on the initial landing that they thought they were going to get later, extra uniforms, extra boots, whatever, all sank. Toilet paper sank, extra ammo, even worse, extra food. That's why Leckie talks about how they basically had to find food, how they came across the giant bottles of sake and all that stuff. But yeah, George S. Eliot was sank, and I think there was some stories about two of those guys, two of the men who was chosen to hang out with the gear. They got rescued, and I think, I could be wrong, it could be a different story, but I think one of them actually was assigned, I don't know, I hope I'm not getting my stories crossed, but there's something about, I remember a story about something with some payroll money that one of them got a hold of, or something like that. Or maybe it was invasion money, because, sometimes they would distribute invasion monies. Anyhow, one of them ended up with an ass load of money that he stuck in his pockets before disembarking off the George S. Eliot. But yeah, everything was lost. Everything was lost.
Here's your little note written by Sid here for the George F. Eliot. 2nd Battalion troops cheered the news that the, quote, rusty box was sunk, quote unquote, with little loss of life and would never have to ride that thing again. Could actually hear the cheers as news went through the battalion in the jungle.
That was before they realized all the crap never made it to the beach.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm guessing you're right on that.
Yeah, so much. I mean, Guadalcanal was just such an interesting campaign, as portrayed in the series and in the books. The landing was uneventful. They were able to land and kind of, oh, well, if this is war, this is good for me, and kind of built some, what's the word?
Camaraderie.
No, camaraderie.
Esprit de corps.
No, I'm thinking more of when you get used to something that you take it for granted. It's and then
you become jaded.
Whatever. It's not that important. Complacent. Kind of build some complacency. Oh, this is going to be easy. These guys, we're going to walk right through these guys, and then 2 days later, you find yourself at Alligator Creek with a bonsai charge up your face. So it was such an interesting campaign, and the fact that it was. People don't realize too, unless you study the PTO. Once again, the proverbial the Marine Corps landed on August 7th, 1942. And the war, as we mentioned with James earlier, didn't end until 1945. Our active,
and look how much changed.
Our active participation, not counting Italy or Africa, but our active participation in the liberation of France and the snuffing out of Germany didn't actually take place as far as ground troops or large-scale invasions until 1944. And the boys in the Pacific were still going at it. That's why there was no cheers spreading across the island when VE Day was announced, because they knew their war wasn't over. And as kind of we were talking about earlier, when the war in Europe ended and we were still fighting in Japan, as we talked when it came to Dick Winters, he thought, well, surely the 101st is going to get out and fight Japan. So he stuck around, tried to extend his career and hoping to train and thus jump into Japan. But luckily for him and everybody else, that battle never came to fruition. But so definitely read Helmet for My Pillow. I need to break out my box set of the Pacific again.
Oh, I'm loving it, man.
But what do you got going on? What you reading?
Well, so like I said, got this thing coming up about VMF 114 on Peleliu. And so I got this book several months ago, and we all do this, I guess. We'll get a book, put it on the shelf. I may not touch it for months, but we'll get there because you're in the middle of other books. A little book, 165 pages long, by J. Hunter Reinberg, called Aerial Combat Escapades. And it's not a long at all, but he flew F-4F Wildcats in the Solomons, and then in the New Georgia campaign, which is just up the slot from the Solomons, and then he flew Corsairs off Peleliu and VMF 122. A great book. I mean, he just had several shoot downs, had some close calls. Just if you like the aviation stuff like I do, you can't get enough of it. But it's just a great little book.
In the Helmet for My Pillow, that's where I got the quote. I can't remember if it was Chesty Puller who said it, or who, but there was a famous quote that he quotes in here because he's talking about his multiple stints in the brig, that if you give me a platoon of brig rats, I'll conquer the world. Because brig rats are basically in the brig because usually they weren't in there for committing a super heinous crime. Obviously that happens occasionally, but most of them are just in there because they're independent thinkers. They didn't want to be told what to do. They went out and they didn't follow orders. And those are the type of guys you want for like special missions, behind the line type stuff. And so But
yeah, that's a thought process for sure.
Yeah, but you got anything coming down the pike you want to plug?
Yeah, I've kind of taken a break on doing that, but I'll plug a few things here. So tomorrow night I'll be on Sarah's show.
That's History Behind the Page.
History Behind the Page. She was kind enough to ask me to come on, so always honored to be asked. So I'll be on her show tomorrow. Wednesday, World War II TV with Paul Woodadge.
Nice.
That'll be my third time on there. With Damon Stout, the guy that I'm collaborating with on the documentary film about his cousin Cowboy Stout, who was the CO of VMF 114 that flew off Peleliu. So we'll be on World War II TV Wednesday. And then, actually, I got a call. This is a pretty cool thing. I got a call Friday from my buddy Jeremy Collins at the World War II Museum, and they've invited me to be on a panel at the International World War II Conference with Richard Frank and Saul David.
When is that?
November 17, 18, and 19.
Now, are you going to be there in person, or are you going to be there?
Oh yeah, no, they'll be there in person. They're gonna. Yeah, it's going to be great, man. I mean, so because Saul's book Devil Dogs is about K35. It drops on the 15th of September. And I wrote the foreword to it because he let me read the manuscript, and I had some suggestions and things to add or whatever. And so did Richard Frank, by the way. It's because of Richard Frank that Saul reached out to me. But yeah, Saul and I have been in touch talking about that. The book, he invited me to one of his book launches in London. Unfortunately, I can't afford to,
Sure.
fly myself to London, and obviously they're not going to pay for that, and I understand that. But I suggested to him a couple of ideas for doing a book launch here in the States. And anyway, that resulted in me being invited to the International World War II Conference to be on a speaking panel with him and Richard Frank in November. So yeah, that's going to be pretty cool. And Don, the good news about stuff like that, as you know, man, we've been doing this a little while now.
Yep.
I always drop the word about what's a scuttlebutt.
Sure.
Because any promo materials, like my bio in World War II magazine that just came out, one of the things it says is co-host of What's a Scuttlebutt podcast.
Beautiful.
And anything to get the word out about our show.
And you're doing a wonderful job at that. I'm looking forward to seeing you on Sarah's show, and we'll probably have her back on our show here again soon, too.
Yeah, we'll have fun, man.
But I think it's going to wrap up the abbreviated episode. We're only about 20 minutes shy, but that's going to wrap up the abbreviated episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast. I'm exhausted. As I said, I basically got off of work, picked up my kid, took her to her freshman orientation at her high school. That was a cluster. And then raced home.
I bet.
And so that's going to wrap it up for this episode. We want to thank everybody for their continued support of everything we do here at the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast. If you're new here, thanks for sticking around, and you can go like, subscribe, and listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Music, pretty much anywhere fine podcasts are found. And we don't say it enough. If you guys are listening to this in the Audible format in your car, that's fantastic. But we do stream live every Tuesday. So as we're recording this, we are streaming live on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitch. And so if you ever want to see what our pretty faces look like, you can head over to youtube.com, look for Digital 410, like and subscribe. You can watch all the old video content plus some of my World War II reenacting content. And then you can join us live in the chat every Monday at 9:30. That is Monday at 9:30. Tuesday is my other podcast. But you can find that on YouTube, WTSPWorldWar2.com. Speaking of which, we want to hear from you. You have any topics, ideas for the show you want to come on and contribute, please email us at info@WTSPWorldWar2.com, and we will talk to you all next week.
This has been a Digital 410 production.